Hi, folks. Let's talk about infrastructure financing and what Nigeria is doing. Hello, folks. Welcome to The Way I See It, which is my podcast on all things money, finance, and the economy. This week, I want to talk about infrastructure in Nigeria. If you've ever been a visitor to Nigeria, you would have noticed the infrastructure in Nigeria does need a major upgrade. I mean, Nigeria needs new roads, new ports, new bridges, power supply, and all that. And it's a lot to get done. Moody's, the rating agency, did estimate that the infrastructure gap in Nigeria would cost about 3 trillion United States dollars. That's a lot of money. And the African Infrastructure Development Index also ranked Nigeria the 23rd nation out of 54 in terms of infrastructure development. So it's no, you don't have to be a genius to find out this is a big, big problem for the largest economy in Africa. So we have the Nigeria, massive economy, massive population, but really poor infrastructure. And the problem is also in terms of the revenues that Nigeria generates and how it spends it. For instance, if you take from January till May 2021, the Nigerian federal government was able to generate in terms of revenues, fiscal revenues, about 1.84 trillion, yeah, in revenues. But the government spent 1.8 trillion on just debt servicing. So we got 1.84 trillion, then we spent 1.8 trillion. That's about 98% of the revenues just on debt servicing, not infrastructure, debt. So the problem is revenues are low, infrastructure is bad, and you can't borrow more than what we're already doing right now, i.e., Nigeria. We have to get innovative. So I was pleased that Nigeria and the president did sign in January uh, the company's income tax, road infrastructure development, and refurbishment investment tax credit scheme. That's a long name. And essentially, what they signed was a tax credit scheme that basically told the corporates in Nigeria, if you invest in infrastructure, you then get a tax credit which you can use to offset the tax that you will pay to the government. And those tax credits can also be carried forward, and they are also portable, which means you can sell that tax credit or you can take them to future years and you can expense those to pay off your taxes. So I think it's brilliant. We're going off balance sheet, that's a government, to then fund infrastructure, because really that's one of the ways that they can get this done. So you have a few big companies taking the government up on this offer. MTN is going to build the 110-kilometer Enugu to Onitsha road. Transcorp is building the Oyimbo to Afam Road. That's where they have their power plant. Then you have Dangote, the big boys. They are going to spend about 22 billion to do the Apapa or Shoki or Jota Road. I mean, that's the road that connects to Nigeria's ports. So very, very important that that road is done and we can have access to the ports, and then we can do imports and exports and get more revenue. So very, very important. Apart from the tax credit, the government is also looking at doing the Infraco, which is going to be like a public-private partnership to raise long-term funds. There's already a seed fund. The government wants to do a seed fund of about 1 trillion into the Infraco. They already have a board. They've already selected asset managers, and those guys are going to just drive equity and debt into that fund, and then that fund is going to invest specifically into infrastructure. So those are two ways that the government is trying to tackle the infrastructure deficit. And I think it's very, very worthwhile and should be commendable to say, hey, we don't have the funds. If you're a private sector and you are operating within a geographical area and infrastructure is just horrible, you can go ahead and fix the roads, you can go ahead and fix the power supply, and we will come in and offer you a tax credit to allow you to take back those investments back into your profit and loss. So excellent. Government should be commended for that. But just to understand that it's not just the big players that can get this done. Nigeria had always had these incentives, especially in the rural areas. So I don't know if you guys know this, but if you have a factory, right, and there is basically no facility in that area where your factory is, and it's located more than 20 kilometers from any government facility, i.e., electricity, water, or tarred road. So if you put a factory in a place, there's no electricity, there's no water, there's no tarred road, you can basically take 100% of how much you invested. You can take that cost out of your taxes, right? And if it's just no electricity, you can take 50% off. If there's no water, 30%, and there's no tarred road, 15%, right? So this is like in the rural areas, you can get the road infrastructure development tax credit, more or less. So we've had the rural areas tax credit that was operational. Now we have the, should we say, the corporate side where you can choose any investment across Nigeria, spend your money, and the government will give it back to you. So that's very commendable, and I like to see more of that. Which then brings me to this deal the NNPC and Dangote are getting into, where the NNPC, the Nigerian Petroleum Corporation, wants to invest 20% in the Dangote refinery, right? So this is instead of it going the private sector guy going to invest in the government asset. In this case, the government guys are investing in the private sector asset and they want to buy about 20% of that private refinery. Of course, the argument is simple. That's going to be a national investment. Dangote refinery is a strategically important investment. So the government wants to have a stake and say in that sector. That is the refinery sector where we get PMS for the cars. But I don't think it's a problem. The only problem I have is if we're investing, we shouldn't be borrowing dollars. Like I've said, we are paying almost 98, 99% in debt service. And I don't think the government should be borrowing, especially in US dollars, to invest in a private refinery. Probably we should allow Dangote the same tax credits. So we could say, hey, we will offer you 10 or 20x tax credits, and that is our equity to your refinery. And it's in line with what we're doing with the corporates and also in the rural area. So that way we don't have to borrow. Dangote can do his business and he does get a tax credit, doesn't have to pay tax for say 10 or 15 years to compensate for the equity that the government's going to buy. I think that way there's going to be a win-win across the board for Nigerian taxpayers and also for the investors in both sides. So, in summary, I like what I'm hearing in terms of infrastructure. We're thinking, we're applying the best practice, we're going off balance sheet. Investors are happy, government is happy, but most importantly, the people are happy, right? Great. So we'll end there. So guys, keep following on Twitter, FinPlan Carlo Aja. That's our Twitter handle. Thank you. I'll see you guys next week. Thank you so much for listening.